Hello and welcome to the video. In this video we're going to take our first look at this camera here. This is the new RunCam 3 from RunCam. Now we've looked at lots of cameras from RunCam on the channel over our time. Here's the very first RunCam, born for RC fanatics. It's got written on there. Then we have quite a few of these. We really like these little cameras and they're on the top of most of the quads that we use. But we are starting to get quadcopters that are being delivered that actually have mounts specifically made for this style of cube camera. Now the first manufacturer that started this trend for these kind of cube style cameras was GoPro, and the GoPro Session is a very similar form factor to this, and we'll talk about that in a second. But don't be fooled, this is a camera that's really designed for FPV, and it's designed around all of those things with everything you need for FPV and none of the things that you don't. So consequently it's an awful lot cheaper than things like the Session. So this at the moment is on the website, hopefully announced on the 10th of April. You can buy it, it's about £80. We've actually got two of them. If I just take the other one off the top of the craft, here it is installed on the top of one of our quadcopters. We've been flying these for a while and you're probably asking yourself, well hang on a minute, why has he got two? And there's a very good reason for that. The reason for that is one of these is actually the camera that you're going to get if you order one as a customer, and the other camera is one of a very small number that was sent out to myself and a couple of other reviewers to have a look at. Now everything so far that's been on about these cameras have been from those reviewers talking about the pre-release unit, but as some things have changed from the pre-production unit to the unit you're actually going to get if you buy it, then there's no point in me talking about technology that you're not going to buy. Let's actually talk about the one that you are. The big difference that you're going to spot here is on the back. This is the pre-production one, or the one that's sent out for reviewers to have a look at in very limited run. You can notice that it's actually got a grey button at the bottom for the Wi-Fi, whereas the real one actually has an orange button here, and there's been a couple of minor tweaks as well. So thanks to RunCam for sending me the actual one so we can talk about that and what comes in the box, and making sure the information we give you is accurate and up to date and is for the product you're actually going to buy. It is almost the same size as something like a GoPro Session. It's very slightly deeper, but in the mounts that we've had here that we've tried it in, it has got in there. Sometimes with a bit of a squeeze, but it has got in. Video modes, as we'll look at in a second in the application, go 1080p, 60 frames per second is the highest setting that it'll go to, and it'll go down to 720p at 120 frames per second as well. You're going to need a Class 10 SD card. The SD card goes under this little slot at the side. This production version has a slightly redesigned SD card slot so that SD card can't get stuck, and to be honest it only did it to me once and I just used a little pin to reset it on the pre-prod unit, but they've changed it now so I can't, no matter what I do, get the SD card to stick. Field of view angle is about 155 degrees. We'll show some more FPV footage in a second so you can see what that looks like. Slightly less than something like a Session, but looks fantastic for FPV footage. NTSC or PAL switchable for TV output. There is a cable in the box, so if you wanted to, you could actually use the USB connection at the side to use this as an FPV camera. Latency is remarkably low. Actually, RunCam have obviously put a lot of effort into that, but personally I would use something like a RunCam Eagle or a RunCam Swift 2 for a primary camera and use this to capture everything in HD. So let's zoom out a second and I'll show you what comes in the box, because this has changed a little bit from some other reviews you may have seen. You get the camera, which fits in that gap. You get a couple of nice ties to actually connect it to your model, and then you get a box with some extra pieces in as well. So you get some more Velcro and mounts. You get a little cable to charge the little thing, and you also get the little USB cable that you can use to connect it to an FPV transmitter. The things that you may have seen that might be confusing you was the previous version. It was almost identical. There's those lovely big cables that come with it. It's got that kind of weird sticky plastic stuff on the back, so they're great. We're actually using them at the moment to hold the camera onto a number of models and they just don't slip. But the reason that the enclosure at the top is so much bigger than the camera is the camera shipped with a soft rubber enclosure that we've actually got on top of this model here. It looks like RunCam have decided for the production units they're going to get rid of that, which is a bit of a shame actually, because I quite liked it, but we are 3D designing a replacement. So let me get my Android tablet, let's quickly connect to it, and I'll show you how you change all the settings on this thing, because there isn't any kind of display or anything here to let you know what kind of mode you're in. You need to have an iOS or an Android device that can talk to this little guy over Wi-Fi. So the first thing we need to do is turn on the camera and then turn on the Wi-Fi. Now I'm going to run the application here in a second, but the first thing we have to do is get all the Wi-Fi stuff set up. So that's the camera ready to rock and roll. We're going to press the Wi-Fi button and you see the blue light come on the back. That means the Wi-Fi is ready. We should get it appearing on our list of Wi-Fi access points on our Android or iOS device. Once it appears, we click on it. Now if it hasn't been set up before, the default password is 1234567890. Now we're connected, we can go straight into the application. Now rather than show it on the screen here, let me just capture the screen from this Android device and show it here on the right hand side of the image, because trying to see this with the reflections and everything isn't going to be perfect. So let me just bring that up. We are going to click on the RunCam app. So if you just go into your Android or iOS store and just find the RunCam app, this is what it looks like. And when it starts, then we should be able to see, connect to your camera. Because the Wi-Fi is already connected, then we should get a view of what we're looking at. There we are, we're actually looking at all the bits and pieces. So what we'll do now then is let's start changing some of the settings. So up here, just above where you can actually see what's going on, we have things like the white balance setting. You can change it for sunny conditions, which is defaulting to now. Cloudy will warm everything up. And you've got things like fluorescent light, and I think the last one's for tungsten or incandescent light. Also, white balance is going to be fine. Next one along allows you to select the exposure if you feel the camera is a little dark or a little light. Next one is field of view. By default it's the 155 degrees, but you can reduce the field of view by selecting it, and hopefully that's kind of showing. It takes a second to appear in the image, but I would normally just run on the widest. The metering is the next thing, whereabouts it's actually setting the exposure for, whether it's average metering of the entire image, center weighted average, or spot metering. Again, if you're having trouble with the camera exposing right, do it that way. Let's click on defaults. Down here at the bottom, underneath the image that you're looking at, you have the options for the different resolutions. So we have 1020 60 frames a second and 30 frames a second with different bit rates as well. And then also the 720p, again with all the different bit rates. Now I'm actually just going to change that back. There we go, that's what we want, 1080p. Now there's another setting in here which is fantastic that I really need to show you, which is up here. If you press the cog in the top right hand corner, there's all these additional settings. So the time synced at the top. This is one called wide dynamic range, WDR. Turning it on and off actually makes a huge difference, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But things like how it all works, the format, how the whether or not it starts recording automatically, all that stuff is available in here. Last thing to note, as you change the different modes, you can just scroll or click on the names of the modes above the big red button at the bottom of the screen. If I go into time-lapse mode, then you'll notice the LED at the top will change. So at the moment it's yellow. If I go into photo mode, then video mode will give me a slightly different LED colour at the top. Time-lapse video. So the LED at the top, this little ring of light, actually tells you which mode you're in. Either video mode, which is a blue one, or one of the photo modes, which is the green one. And again, we'll leave it in video because that's the one I'm interested in. To be honest, once you've got your camera set up and you're happy, then you're probably not going to touch this at all really. It is worthwhile me giving a more practical demonstration of what wide dynamic range does on these cameras, because I've had other ones where WDR, wide dynamic range, being turned on and off made a small difference, but on these it can make all the difference in the world. Now, the great thing about having two of these cameras is I can have one with wide dynamic range turned on and one with it off, and have them side by side and show you exactly what wide dynamic range does. Now, this is really down to personal preference about how you want to fly, but with WDR turned on, it should mean that the shadows aren't as deep and that you can still see bits and pieces in the shadows that you normally would miss, and also the camera will work very hard to make sure that the sky isn't blown out. So on the video here, on the left hand side we have the wide dynamic range turned on, and on the right hand side is turned off. And I'll just let you see the difference in the two images. Now, this is quite a bright sunny day. We're walking through our usual lane that we use to test these cameras in, and it has quite a bit of deep shadow, and we'll kind of show you the difference. One thing that I'm spotting straight away is with wide dynamic range on, you're actually getting a much more natural picture from how it looks to my naked eye. Now, RunCam recommend that if you're in a bright situation, a bright sunny day, then run the camera at 1080p 60 frames a second, and you can turn wide dynamic range off. If it's a more overcast day, quite cloudy, then again run 1080p 60 frames a second but turn wide dynamic range on. Or if you're in much lower light conditions, then change the settings on the camera to be 1080p 30 frames a second, and again turn wide dynamic range on. And by going to 30 frames a second, it gives the sensor a little bit more time to get the light to give a slightly better image in those lower light conditions. However, we're looking here at a really bright sunny day, and I actually like the way that WDR, the wide dynamic range, is handling the conditions here. So it's very much down to personal preference, but for me, I'm pretty much leaving wide dynamic range on all the time, and then I don't have to bother with an Android or iOS device at the field setting everything up. I can just go out and fly. First of all, I like the price. I like the fact they're about £80. I've been looking at buying one of the older GoPro Sessions to fit some of the mounts that I have on these newer quads that are starting to appear here, and I just couldn't bring myself to put 150 to 250 to £300 worth of technology right there at the front of the quad, where there's a very good chance it's going to get smashed. If you look on Instagram or Twitter, there are lots of pictures of things getting broken, and these larger cameras with the bigger screens do always seem to find the rocks in the grass and get smashed to pieces in the process. Now, as you probably saw, there are additional things that you can buy from the website, enclosures and also reinforcing glass, and we will be getting that stuff because we are going to be putting these cameras in harm's way, but I'd rather do that with an 80 quid unit than a 250 quid unit. Because the form factor is so similar, we have managed to get it in pretty much every mount we've tried so far. If it was a very tightly made mount for something like a GoPro Session, then it might not fit. But so far, so good. We've looked at the rates. 1080p 60 frames a second for me is fantastic. I'm not interested in 4K mode. If I was, I'd be buying something else. The ability to set things like the white balance and the exposure level and stuff via the application is very welcome. It's a step above the kind of stuff that you can do with the smaller RunCams that we have quite a few of here. Wide dynamic range is very good on the camera. I really like that feature. When you turn it on, you get a much more natural sky colour, and it does let you see into the shadows a little bit better. You do sacrifice some of that saturation, but that's what you get with wide dynamic range. If you're going to get one of these things, make sure that's turned on, because I'm not sure it is by default. Audio recording isn't fantastic. It's got the mic at the back at the top. You don't tend to get an awful lot of usable noise from FPV anyway, apart from the whine of the motors and the rush of the wind past the camera, but it's serviceable. It does provide FPV video out. Now, according to RunCam, the latency is about 45 to 50 milliseconds. From the limited testing we've done here, I would probably say I believe that. However, as I've said before, I wouldn't use one like that. I'd just stick one in the cradle, let it get on with taking the HD video, and fly with a camera with something like an on-screen display or something that's already built in. Something like a Swift 2, for example, is fantastic. There are a couple of things to consider. It isn't a GoPro Session, it's not designed to be. Lots of other people are comparing this guy to the GoPro Session, which I don't think is particularly fair. The GoPro Session is at least twice as expensive and designed to be an all-round action camera. This RunCam 3 is designed to be an FPV recording camera only, really. So trying to say, oh well, it hasn't got a 4K mode, it doesn't have digital image stabilization, doesn't have voice control, it doesn't have super view. If you want those kind of features, then yeah, you can absolutely have them. You just have to spend an awful lot more money. The larger lens does mean that it is more susceptible to crashes. It is stuck up out there in the way. I have designed a little 3D printable shroud that goes over it to try and protect it, but as I've been making this video, I spotted that RunCam have started to put the extras onto the page, so I'm definitely going to get hold of some of those toughened glass covers to make sure that if I do occasionally have a little bit of a tough landing, I'm not going to destroy the camera. Last couple of things quickly, it's not designed to be a dash cam. It does talk about the fact that it pulls about 600 milliamps when it's running, and having it connected to a power supply while it's been run will not do the battery any good at all. So if you want to use one of these on the dash of your car, van or lorry to record what's going on in front of you, then this probably isn't the camera for you. And the last thing to keep in mind is there isn't a way to change the battery. It's a completely sealed unit. It's not waterproof, but it does mean that when the battery gets low, then unfortunately that's the end of your recording. Whereas with some of the other RunCam cameras, the ability to swap those batteries out means that when you get low, you're not stuck. So hopefully that's been a useful overview and review of the camera. The fact that we have two here means that we've got one on top of the Holybro Shurunken 180 Pro that we're going to be reviewing very soon, and we also have space for the other one on top of our favourite Brain FPV powered quad as well. Potentially have another couple of spaces for these square ones too. I'm tempted to order some of the extras for the ones that we have here, and when they come in I'll do a little update video showing you how they work. Thank you for taking the time to watch that video. We try and release at least 2 videos a week, usually a quick tip on a Tuesday and a more in-depth video on a Friday, and sometimes we manage to get a few more out as well. If you're interested in radio control, then the playlists are useful to have a look at. Anything that's called Introduction To is an organised set of videos that teach you from first principles about the subject that you're interested in. But we also have information about the majority of popular open source flight controllers, how to build quadcopters, fixed wing models, reviews, setups, unboxing, all kinds of things in here as well. So if you haven't already had a look at the playlist, then I'd recommend going have a look through here to see if there's anything that takes your fancy. Finally, we do also provide updates through things like Twitter, Instagram, and also post all of our 3D designs on Thingiverse as well. So if you like what we're doing here on YouTube, have a look at those things and subscribe to us there, and you'll find out what we're up to in advance of the videos coming out here on the channel.